Hello and welcome back to another Warlords of Draenor video. So this time it's going to be one of my critique videos, and despite the big flashy title that I probably decided to paste on this video, this is a critique video, and it's going to be about Ashran. Now Ashran is the new open world PvP zone that's going on in Warlords of Draenor. If you don't know exactly what's going on with Ashran, then I do have a overview video on the channel, so you can check that out. Now, I've recently got a lot of flack from people over my critique of Warlords of Draenor. I just want to say to those people, first, to start off this video, the reason why I critique is because I truly, well, basically do love World of Warcraft. It's the game I have played the most by far. You know, I wouldn't say these things if I didn't care, and I do care. Now, I am going to put my money where my mouth is on this one, so I'm going to do a video tomorrow that's basically my own design for Ashran. I've been thinking about this for a few different days. It won't be visually crazy, it'll just be a bunch of diagrams, but I think that it should be interesting enough, and hopefully it would fix one or two of the problems that I currently have. So yeah, that's going on tomorrow, and if you want to get a notification then, well, I don't know, either subscribe or just be sure to check back tomorrow. Now, Ashran itself is something that is teeming with potential, in my opinion. It really does. Now, before we get into the main list of criticisms, I just want to talk about one or two of the things that I actually do like about the current implementation of Ashran. So first of all, I think that, well, the main lane gameplay does basically suck, but there are lots of side objectives, and the nice thing about the side objectives is that when you go to them, you are basically dealing with less players, you're not dealing with big clumps, and you can just really have this nice emergent feel to your PvP gameplay. And I think that while perhaps some of the rewards are a little bit strange with the bonus objectives, and also that they don't really matter enough, well, all that's true, but I really do like the gameplay that surrounds just fighting for them, even if there isn't a great point to fighting for them at the minute. So that's definitely a lot of fun. And as for the main Zerg gameplay, well, it can be fun for a little bit of time, and I think the amount of fun that you are going to have may depend on the class that you play. Sometimes it just can be a little bit clunky. And then just in terms of other things, well, you know, going around the place collecting the artifacts and getting a few class buffs is fun, and there are actually lots of little class buffs and things. For example, there was one that made my disengage a 5-second cooldown. There's lots of little things like that that are great additions and that are a lot of fun. However, my 5 points here are going to be concerned more about the overall picture. These are not really coming from a kind of small individual player level, it's more of a kind of, I don't want to say high level because that just sounds so disgustingly pretentious, but they're from more of a design perspective. And I think that there are one or two things with the design of Ashran that could perhaps be tweaked just a little bit to offer a better experience. Now then, with all of that gumph said, let's talk about the actual points. So coming in at number 5, my 5th largest problem is that Ashran is just too small at the minute. Now Ashran is really rather small. I was actually quite surprised. Now, Blizzard did say that it was going to be the size of the Isle of Thunder. Well, when you take the mountain range that dominates one side of Ashran away, and then when you take away the faction hubs, Ashran in terms of the playable area is actually rather small. The main lane in which combat is focused is actually really tiny, and that's what surprised me a lot, I think. You can see your opponent's tower from your tower, and I actually timed myself running along the lane and getting from the exit of my own faction's area to the middle of the map took me about 15 seconds. Now running from the final tower of my faction's place to that of the opponent's also took 43 seconds. So unopposed you can cross the lane in 43 seconds. Now obviously if you try to do that when there's full on combat going on, well, you'll be wrecked. Obviously. So yeah, I mean take that as you will, but I do think that it's a little bit too small. It doesn't really make it feel like an epic challenge in a way. And I think the lane itself could be littered with more things. I'd like it if those towers would perhaps fire down at players. I'd like it if there was just a little bit more going on there. Because right now, it just does come off as two Zergs of players throwing damage at each other, and whoever has the biggest damage will win. And I think that's rather unfortunate, and it doesn't really support engaging gameplay. So, another thing about it being small is that of course it does exacerbate the Zerging problem, as everyone is squashed together in a smaller area. However, the actual length of the lane doesn't really matter as much in Zerging. What matters is the width of the lane, and if Blizzard are able to just find a way to disperse people across that width. Right now, it's a relatively narrow lane that people are all sort of crammed into. Maybe if they were to do 2 lanes, or one really wide lane with objectives on the side, so for an example, a wide lane with a tower on the left and a tower on the right, then that would spread people out amongst the lane a little bit more, and it would just feel a bit less clumped. So that could happen. But anyway, yeah, I do think that it is just a little bit too small at the minute. Now, bear in mind that I'm really basing what I'm saying here off when Ashran is decently full. Bearing in mind, of course, that Ashran will be shared between numerous servers using a cross-realm zone system. Now, that means that Ashran should, for the most part, be relatively full all the time. When I've played Ashran, in fact, when it's maybe been, I don't know, half population or even smaller than that, so maybe 40 versus 40 or 50 versus 50 as opposed to 100 versus 100, well, then it has worked out a bit better with the smaller size. So right now it just feels like Ashran is too small for the number of people that are put in it in terms of the main lane. Now the bonus objectives size-wise are totally cool, I just think they need to rebalance how the main lane is handled in terms of the size and also the sort of width of it and how the little in-the-lane objectives like the towers are spread out. So there we go, that's point number 5. Now moving on to point number 4, I think that the balance between the bonus objectives and the main objective, both in terms of gameplay implications and rewards, is a little bit messed up. I've got no idea how I'm going to make a title for that one. Anyway, this is actually a really major issue in my opinion, and I know it is number 4 in the list, but maybe if I was in a different mood it would be higher, I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, I did actually have a decent amount of trouble articulating this one. Really, that's because I really enjoy design, but I'm not exactly a wordsmith, as I'm sure many of you will know, especially many of you who have witnessed my many embarrassing typos and things like that. But anyway, I'll just first of all explain what's going on in Ashran. So, your main objective is to push the middle lane, obviously because that will lead you to your opponent's base. However, there are then side objectives. Now, I think that I've got a decent enough-ish sort of head on my shoulders when it comes to designing and analysing things, so to me it would make sense that the ultimate goal of a zone like this would be to push the lane, reach the enemy's base, and win in as far as you can in the Ashran system, because obviously you can't win and then stop the match because obviously it's unending. Anyway, so I will cover the unending nature of Ashran later on in the video. But anyway, the mid lane is the path to the enemy base, and Blizzard have said, quote, it is the centerpiece of Ashran. Now, if there are bonus objectives on this island, then surely the primary objective of their existence should be to help the main objective of pushing the lane. I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the majority of the things on the island should all feed into your main goal of pushing towards your enemy base and killing them, because after all, it's Horde versus Alliance, attack the other dude's base. So the current implementation, bearing all that stuff in mind, does come off as being rather bizarre to me. Now, first of all, let's just talk about the objectives. So, some of the side objectives on Ashran will only reward the individual players who are there, and then some of them will actually help out the main battle. Now, currently they don't help out too much. For an example, there is a summonable Ancient that will do essentially negligible damage. It's not scary for the other team, it doesn't really help you push the lane, and it's just a bit dull. The same thing goes for the Ogre King. Now, one of the good things that I have heard from Blizzard is that they plan on buffing these things to make them even more powerful. I'm really happy to see that, and my just word of wisdom or word of whatever to Blizzard here is to really go ham with it. Make these bonus objectives really powerful, because what you actually want to do in Ashran is get people out of the main lane and into the objectives, but in such a way where their key goal is always to still push the main lane. Now, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. In terms of one or two other of the objectives, there's also a Power Orb, which will give a single player a buff. I think it's like 200% health and damage, though it's not really too important in the grand scale of things. Anyway, so currently the lack of a meaningful effect on your gameplay does make these objectives just feel a little bit pointless in a way. But more importantly, because they don't feel that powerful, they don't exactly augment the gameplay for those in the main lane too much. Currently, if the enemy sees the Ogre King, they don't really get scared, and they should. Of course though, Blizzard are tweaking this, and once again I just want to reiterate how important it is that Blizzard make the Ogre King so powerful that it's scary, you know? I mean, imagine what it was like, say, if in Alterac Valley your team tried to take Drekthar with 3 of his lieutenants up. It probably wouldn't go too well. Stuff like that I think can be really engaging and interesting and fun, so hopefully Blizzard do manage to do that. However, there's more to these bonus objectives, and really this is where my main critique lies. The bonus objective areas are where the most rewards for your personal character are to be found. Now, for an example, I got 150 honor by collecting some ore and bringing it to an Alliance minecart. You do not get rewarded much for pushing the main lane of Ashran, yet you do get rewarded for doing some of these bonus objectives. Blizzard have said that this is intentional. But can you see a bit of a disparity here? So the bonus objectives don't matter as much in terms of the fight, but they really do matter in terms of rewards. Whereas the main objective doesn't really matter in terms of rewards, but does matter in terms of the fight. They're kind of at odds, they don't really fit well together in my opinion. So the way I would have it is that you would have it so that the most optimal way of getting honor points or whatever you want is to ultimately push towards the enemy's base and sort of claim victory in as much as Ashran will allow it. But then doing the little side objectives will of course drastically help you out in the lane, but also will still reward you solidly as they do now. Essentially, I think that this problem can be fixed by doing two things. A, making the side objectives more powerful, and B, adding some sort of reward or temporary end that's involved with reaching your opponent's base and sacking it. I think that really is important because right now, it just feels like you want to push the main lane because you want to defeat the Horde, but you don't get rewarded for that, so instead you just run off to do the bonus objectives, not for the sake of helping the main lane, but for the sake of getting rewards. I just don't think that feels as cohesive and engaging as it possibly could. Now, if we were to say zoom back to Wintergrass, one of the cool things about Wintergrass was you always had your key objective of taking or defending the base. But then there were little side objectives. Now, these side objectives would be rewarding in themselves, however, you wouldn't necessarily do them for their individual reward, you would do them because of how they would help you attain your ultimate reward at the end. So maybe you got some honor or whatever for destroying a tower, fine. But ultimately the reason why you destroyed that tower is so that you could win at the end. Let's take another example, Alterac Valley. The reason why you destroyed the towers in Alterac Valley is because you wanted to make the final fight against Drekthar a more winnable thing, or against your man Stormpike. Imagine an endless Alterac Valley in which either, let's just say the Drekthar and his friend, and they would just like respawn, but the only real reward you got was from destroying the towers. It would shift the gameplay of that Alterac Valley fundamentally, because instead of getting rewarded for overall being the victorious faction, you get rewarded for, well, being the player who runs off to the side objective. Even though your key goal may not be destroying that side objective to help kill the end boss, your key goal would just be destroying it for the honor that you'd get. Maybe that seems a bit messy, but I think you'll catch my drift if you maybe listen again, I don't know. I just think it's a little bit of a problem, but it's something that Blizzard could quite easily fix. I suppose that's why it's not really higher in this list. Again, you know, these critique videos aren't just me standing here and saying, World of Warcraft is terrible, cancel your pre-order, etc. No, it's me sitting here saying, listen, this stuff could be a little bit more awesome if we did these things. And hopefully that's what people get out of this. Anyway, so that is point 4 covered. Let's move on to point number 3. And that is that the final stage of pushing the central lane to your opponent's base, i.e. the closest you actually get to, sort of air quotes, winning, is actually really boring. And this just has an effect on the overall lane. So in Ashran, when you win, sort of air quotes win, what actually happens is that you end up standing on a bit of land, throwing DPS onto the bridge, which leads to your opponent's base, because that's just where the enemy team will clump up. And this just turns into this really dull stalemate that involves clicking buttons and getting no real effect. Now let's take another example. Let's just say Wintergrasp. Now this was so exciting when you won, because you would overcome the defenders, you'd rush in through that gate, and you'd claim your reward. There was a sense of speed and euphoria at the end. And if you were, say, defending, what would happen is the enemy would break through a wall, and you'd muster your defense to the next wall and try your damnedest to make sure they didn't get in. There was a fantastic flow there. A really, really great flow that just added a lot of tension. Ashran doesn't really hit that so much. And I think that one of the things that this really leads to is Ashran not having much of a sense of achievement. The best you can do is get into your opponent's base and kill a few vendors. Now sure, Wintergrasp was rewarding in terms of honor and all that, but I think what's extremely important is that it provided a rewarding experience at the end, and I mean just the physical feeling of victory. That felt great. You know, you put some time and effort into a fun system with an engaging gameplay flow, and then at the end you'd be rewarded with some gear or, you know, points, whatever, but with a sense of victory, more importantly. And that triumphant rush towards the central relic at the end of the fight was just a cool thing. Sometimes MMO developers maybe just get a little bit too caught up on the loot reward and maybe forget about just how rewarding an experience can be. So anyway, right now there's a bit of a problem with the end, and overall this means that in Ashran, players' effort is not rewarded in terms of getting that epic experience. Now, Blizzard's ex-chief creative officer, Rob Pardo, recently said that Blizzard is all about offering epic experiences. In terms of the tension and the emotion of an hour of Ashran, all you kind of get is just a bit of a monotony, whereas Wintergrass would offer highs and lows and finally a great sense of victory. Just think about it, literally, as you break through the defenses of the Wintergrass base, you get highs and lows, you know? You punch through that wall, then you rush to the next one, you work on destroying that wall, then you rush to the next one. There's a flow in gameplay. When you break through that wall, you charge through. Those things felt great. And of course, that's an example you can apply to many other things in PvP. So how do they fix this problem of just the flow being a little bit monotonous and the end, quote, end of, you know, the best I can do is air quotes when I talk about the end of Ashran, but when finally reaching the Horde base, you know, it's just a bit boring. How can they fix that? Well, as much as I wish I could say that I have a solution here, I just think that it might be an inherent problem to Ashran and its endless nature. Now, speaking of the endless nature, let's move on to point number 2, and that is the lack of a definitive start and end. A lack of a victor or loser in Ashran. I think this is a really big problem in terms of the game design. Now, previously I was talking about pushing the land and the lane even, and the kind of flow of Ashran. But yeah, I wasn't really just talking about the overall Battle of Ashran on a kind of macro scale. You see, the thing is that Ashran never ends. Even if you push the enemy all the way back to their base, there is not much of an effect. Ashran will continue. It will always continue. There's just this constant monotony. And what it does is it means that there's not any cause and effect in Ashran, and that is just a thing that I sorely miss, I suppose. Now, people do things in a game because they want a result. Now, I know this is a bit of a false equivalency, but, you know, in a competitive game, a PvP game, they want to win. Let's just take Smite or Dota. In a single match of that, it's all about pushing your opponent's lane and ultimately wrecking their base to earn a reward. After that match, well, you are done and you claim your reward. Well, the thing is that in Ashran, you could get in, wreck your opponent's base, but instead of being able to claim your reward or your victory, your epic experience at the end, all that happens is there's a new wave of reinforcements and you keep on battling. And for what? You know, Blizzard have said themselves that the central lane is not supposed to be hyper rewarding. So, I mean, the only victory you get is easier access to the slightly rewarding bonus objectives, and honestly, I don't feel like that's a very compelling reason to, air quotes, win Ashran. And again, as I've said a few times in this video, it's just that the monotony keeps on going. Now, I understand why Blizzard is doing it this way. They want constant, always-on world PvP. And they will have it. But the problem, in my opinion, is that without a clear victory, it's going to be without the epic experience to cap it off, and it's just not going to be particularly engaging. You know, people don't like it when they don't get a sort of a high amount of epic per hour. And I just think that the lack of cause and effect and all that stuff is really going to hurt with Ashran. So how do you fix this? Well, earlier on in the video, I talked about my own design for Ashran that I'm currently working on. That, I think, will fix this problem, in that you will still get constant, you know, this, like, lane-pushing Ashran-style gameplay, but there will be an ultimate objective that's sort of Wintergrasp style. Hint, it's a way of having a big capturable fort in the middle of the lane, that can be captured by one of the sides, which will grant a VOA-style thing, but still having balanced lane-pushing PvP, no matter who actually owns that middle fort, with interesting and engaging side objectives and a whole bunch of things like that. Now, don't worry, I'll have snowballing measures and lots of things like that. But yeah, just wait and see. It might be tomorrow's video. It might be. We'll just have to see how that all pans out. But anyway, number 1. What is my number 1 problem? It's the Zerg! Ugh, the Zerg. No, not Kerrigan and friends. This is the Zerg, as in lots of players in a big old clump. Ashran's main land battle essentially just involves 2 Zergs of players fighting. Now, this, in my opinion, is a pretty poor form of gameplay. Now, PvP, especially in an MMO, is all about action and reaction. You see what your opponent does to you, and then you react intelligently to it. I think that's the beauty of the arena in World of Warcraft. Because of the way the game's combat works, you can very much get a read on your opponent, come up with a strategy to counter what they're doing, and over time, whoever responds more intelligently, more often, should win. However, in a Zerg, that's all actually stripped away. Instead, you are just sort of throwing damage at this big, nebulous blob. it doesn't actually feel like you are personally doing anything. The cause and effect, action and reaction are all just sort of stripped out of the combat, which makes it feel rather dull. Now, one of the reasons why I actually enjoy the PvP that goes on in and around the bonus objectives of Ashran is because there are few enough players to actually still allow for engaging, responsive PvP combat. However, in a Zerg, you run into problems. Another thing is that World of Warcraft's actual gameplay mechanics don't work out too well here. Well, what if you want to target the opponent's healer? That's a great idea, but good luck clicking on their character or their health bar. And don't even bother trying to tab target them, that just won't work. The basic process of picking out an enemy and attacking them is a bit of a fiddly mess. Now, I know that since many of WoW's spells rely on a target, this just makes it feel really poor. And sure, maybe if we had Wildstar style straight line skill shots and things like that, like say the mage's new arcane orb, it would be a bit better in terms of replayability, but overall I do really enjoy how World of Warcraft's combat works. So how do you fix all of this? Well, Blizzard have tried to with the bonus objectives. And I think that if they make bonus objectives more important, not only in terms of rewards, but in terms of the actual effect on the lane, then it's going to get people out of there. At the end of the day, if you're just in Ashran because you want to push back the Horde and you want to win, you don't really care about the honor points, then you're going to be sitting in that main lane really bored. And believe me, currently the most optimal way of winning is just to push the main lane. Well, if you know that going and freeing the Ogre King, or well, unlocking the Ogre King or doing something else is the most optimal way to push that main lane, then you're going to have little raiding parties of players running off all over the place. Not because they want personal reward, but because they want to aid the battle and they want to win. That will take players out of the Zerg in a sort of meaningful way, and that will reduce the Zerging problem, so that's really important. Then, making Ashran a bit larger could also help, because you will have, more players, well, you'll have the same amount of players on a larger area, therefore, it'll be spread out to the degree where, hopefully, you won't have such a crazy thing going on with the big old dirty Zerg. And then another thing they could do is perhaps add 2 or maybe even 3 lanes with their own objectives and towers. That way, you would be pushing things in 2 different lanes, which would literally split the player base and obviously reduce the Zerging problem. However, it seems like Blizzard are quite focused on having a single lane solution to the Ashran gameplay. Anyway, that's basically about it. Zerging is a problem that I think is just fundamental to the current map design of Ashran, and hopefully they can design around it by having really engaging bonus objectives that matter a little bit more and just implement some of the kind of reward and gameplay balancing suggestions that I talked about earlier. Then another thing that they could certainly do is make some things to really shake up the gameplay. You are on an island out in the sea. Well, what if there was a storm which would have some effect on the Zerg gameplay? What if the ogres in the giant big ogre stronghold decided to start firing down mortars on the lane? What if lots of little fun things like that happened to just shake up the gameplay? Because honestly, the Zerg versus Zerg combat isn't high-level skilled and ultra-balanced PvP. They should just focus on making that awesome and fun, and I think doing things like, a storm coming in and lightning coming down, or maybe things being shot at you, I think that could be really cool, and it could actually shake up the gameplay a little bit. So yeah, that's basically it. Once again, I just want to reiterate, this video is made because I think Ashran has lots of potential, and I want it to be as good as possible. I'm going to make my own kind of version of Ashran. Not literally, but I'll make a few diagrams. And I'll talk about that hopefully in a video tomorrow. And I know that, of course, a lot of people in this video, A, won't make it this far, but B, are going to say a lot of things about, oh, you just hate the game nowadays. You've made a few critique videos. Just want to say to those guys, you are probably offended about what I'm saying about the expansion for the same reason as to why I'm saying it. You're probably offended because you see it as me attacking the game that you love. At the end of the day, I'm doing this critique because I love World of Warcraft and I want it to be better. I want it to be better for you. And that's the purpose of this video. I'm not interested in raging or crying or anything like that. I'm interested in feedback and critique as a game designer, and making the best design that's going to make as many people happy as, we possibly can. So that's my 2 cents for this. Well, I suppose this isn't my 2 cents. This is my 2 cents for today. You'll get 2 cents tomorrow in the form of my own version of Ashran, assuming I can get it done on time, which will mean that you'll actually get 4 cents of mine in total. So I think you should all consider yourself pretty bloody lucky. Anyway, that's it for the video. Be sure to let me know about your own suggestions for Ashran. in the comments. Usually I'd say, let me know what you think. No, what I want to hear today is your own suggestions. What do you think would be fun and engaging and awesome? Let's keep this just ultra constructive and fun, because at the end of the day, I think that's what we all want the most. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.